My name is Dustin Kelly, but everybody calls me DJ. I'm prior Army, serving as both a Ford observer and a military police officer. I've spent the last 14 and a half years as a police officer and detective in a large metropolitan police department. Two things that I've learned throughout my career. One, everybody has a story to tell. And two, the best stories are true. This is the DTD Podcast. Guys in the studio this week, Jack Carr. Man, I've been waiting on this one. I burned through the books. He's got a new one coming out April 13th of this year, The Devil's Hand, The Terminal List, True Believer, Savage Son, some of the best reading that I've ever done. Now, my first question to you, you were a Navy SEAL. You're a New York Times best-selling author. You have officialjackcarr.com. Danger Close podcast, Amazon Prime show that's coming out with Chris Pratt. What's it like to be winning at life?
Well, I never thought of it in those terms, but I sure am busy and I'm pretty tired all the time. We have 3 kiddos at home and dog and everything else that goes around with juggling kids ages 10 to 15. So it's a busy time, but I feel extremely fortunate to have done one of the 2 things that I wanted to do in life, which was serve my country in uniform, specifically as a SEAL, and then to be doing that second thing that I wanted to do in life from a very early age, which is write novels just like this. So I feel very fortunate that these novels are connecting with people, that they're resonating with people, and that it was really a grassroots effort that got them where they are. Because I didn't go on Joe Rogan's podcast until after that book made the New York Times list. I didn't go on Tucker Carlson until after it made the New York Times list. Chris Pratt didn't say anything about it until after. I was hoping all 3 of those people would kind of help get it to the New York Times list, but now I am so thankful that it was grassroots effort of hunters, of veterans, of tactical shooters, of readers that helped get this book and this series where it is today, just by word of mouth and modern word of mouth, the social media, telling a friend, whether it's 2 people that follow you, 5 people that follow you, or when you get to Chris Pratt's 30 million. So I feel very fortunate.
In talking about your military career, I want to go into that a little bit, but first I want to go back a little further. Your mom was a librarian, from what I understand.
Yep. Your
love of books, does that come from her? Was that always kind of, even when you didn't want to do it as a kid, was it kind of drilled into you like, hey, you need to read? Because I always tell my girls, I have all 3 girls, I say, no one can ever take away how smart you are. They can take away a lot of things from you, but they can never take away if you're smarter. So was that something that was drilled into you?
Yeah, I wouldn't say drilled in because it was so natural. It was just something that was very natural for us. My parents were reading to us from a very early age. We always had books around. It was just what you did, but we weren't told that's what you did. It was just kind of what we did. So it was very natural, and I loved reading from a very early age. And then when I found out what SEALs were at age 7, I went to the local library, of course, with my mom, and she taught me how to use that to teach me how to do some research, and found out about UDT, found out about SEALs, found out about frogmen, found out about that history. And my takeaway was that, hey, this book anyway that I'm reading here, this magazine article, because there was hardly anything written back then. It was like 1 chapter in a book back then in the early 80s, and a couple magazine articles. But that was really it. It was hard to find anything on special operations in general, SEALs specifically. But my takeaway was that, hey, these guys are some of the most elite fighting special operations forces in the world, and the training is some of the toughest ever devised by a modern military. So I was like, I'm all in. But then I couldn't go down that Google rabbit hole. You couldn't just type it in and spend the next years of your life like reading everything. It was a finite amount that was out there, and back then you could actually read it all. So for me, it was very natural to transition into these books, some of which my parents were reading, that had protagonists with backgrounds that I wanted to have in real life one day. So very early on, I started reading Tom Clancy and Nelson DeMille and David Morrell and A.J. Quinnell and J.C. Pollock and Mark Bolden and all these guys who had protagonists with those special operations background. Usually it was an Army Special Forces guy in Vietnam, or a SEAL in Vietnam, or some sort of a CIA guy in Vietnam. But that was the typical background for protagonists in the 80s and into the 90s. And so very early on, I knew that, hey, after my time in the SEALs, I am going to write books like this, just like the kind I'm enjoying right here in 1984, 85, 86, 87, 88,
Right.
89. So that's I knew where I was going. So all of that prepared me for the military, because I was gaining knowledge as I went, and I was enjoying that research, because I'm also reading the nonfiction stuff. I'm reading stuff in general about warfare and terrorism and insurgencies and counterinsurgencies. So I'm building up that academic study even at a very young age, when I'm also doing the physical and mental stuff I think I need to do to increase the chances of getting into the SEAL teams. So all that stuff kind of led me down this path and into the SEAL teams, and then after 20 years out and into this world of publishing. So I can't really think of a better foundation than reading for what I'm doing now, and I can't really think of a better foundation for anything in life than reading, because it's going to help you no matter what you do in life. And I worry about our kids also. Like it's hard. Like I was reading to them in the crib right away. I was trying to do those things that my parents did for me, and there's just so many more distractions these days.
Absolutely.
So I do worry about that, and I'm thinking maybe they're going to become audiobook customers.
But I think that's still okay as long as they're getting involved. I mean, if you're getting them involved in books, because there's so much crap out there that they could be watching. At least if they're listening to an audiobook, they're still focusing on literature, whether that be fiction, nonfiction, whatever it is. They're still focusing on it, just in a more technologically advanced way than you and I did.
Yeah, and that's my hope, that they make that leap, because right now they have yet to make that leap to the audiobook. So it's my hope. So we shall see, but there's just a lot more distractions now, because when we were growing up, we could read, we could turn on the television, we could ride our bike down and get a VHS tape from the video store,
right?
If it was in, if it wasn't sold, if it wasn't out, already rented, and not in the return pile, and then you could play Atari 2600, like, or climb a tree. Like, those are the things that we had that we could do. Today there are so many more electronic distractions for these kids, especially now during COVID, when we were all at home from last March through the summer, and then here in Utah, where I am, the kids went back to school. So they did go back to school in the fall, but still, it's having everybody under one roof there. The electronic devices sure got to work out.
So, in talking about you going into the SEALs, because you said from age 7, that's what you wanted to do. Why was that the choice? Because you said you read about other special forces, you read about the Army, you read about the Marine Corps and everything. What was it that stood out to you about the SEALs that made you go, yep, that's the ones? Yeah.
So before that, so I'd grown up with this. I mean, there's never any. It was a calling. It was a calling from a very early age, and I think a lot of that came from. Well, it was innate. I think a lot of it, but then also, my grandfather was killed in World War II. He was a Corsair pilot, so those are the planes that had the gull wings that would fold up. And there was a TV series back then, late '70s, and then by the time I got to it in the early '80s, it was in syndication, called Black Sheep Squadron. I think it was originally called Baba Black Sheep, but then it was Black Sheep Squadron in syndication, starring Robert Conrad, portraying Pappy Boynton. So I read Pappy Boynton's autobiography. I met him at an air show, and I grew up with my grandfather's the maps, silk maps they used to give aviators back then, because if you hit the water with a paper map, it would disintegrate in the water, but silk maps just got wet. It still works. And his medals, his wings, from black and white photos of him and his squadron. So I grew up with all those things around. They weren't on the wall or anything, but they were in a box, and I had them in my room. So I knew that was the path that I was going on, and I just didn't know what I was going to do. As I started to when I started to get older, like at age 6, I was just drawn to that ground combat. Like, I found myself, even though my grandfather flew, I was just drawn to this ground combat side of things. And then I found out about SEALs through a movie called The Frogmen, old black and white movie that had these guys crawling up over the beaches and blowing up obstacles and all that. So then I just focused my research on that. And then I found out about these other special operations units, but I was always just drawn back to that SEAL, back to BUDS, back to Hell Week, back to what I was studying at the time, which was what they had done in Vietnam, which was a watershed moment for all special operations, of course. But I was just drawn to what the SEALs did then, and what and that training pipeline, because essentially we lived off the reputation that those guys earned in the jungles of Vietnam, from the end of Vietnam up to 2001. I mean, there were flashpoints in Grenada, Panama, Mogadishu, those sorts of things, but there wasn't sustained combat operations for the entire force since the end of Vietnam. So
So we owe those guys everything. And then once September 11th hit, we built off that foundation, just like they would expect, and move and adapt, just like the enemy's doing to us.
When you go into the Navy, of course you're going to go SEAL. You know that. You go to BUDS. This is brought up a lot in your interviews. You get rolled back from the first class you were in. I think you were in class 212. You get rolled back from the first one. Does it dash your hopes at all?
Nope. So I made Hell Week. That was like the main thing. So get through Hell Week. Then you have a walk week after that, because everywhere you go in BUDS for the whole 6 months you run, and you run with a swim buddy. You have to be within arm's reach of somebody that entire time. So you never walk for that 6 months if you're going anywhere. And so after Hell Week, that's the only time you walk. You put on tennis shoes. The rest of the time you're in combat boots, but you put on this tennis shoes because your body has been up since Sunday morning the previous week up through this Friday, and you get a couple hours of sleep Wednesday and Thursday, but on a beach, on a cot, like it's crazy, and your body's just deteriorating during that time. It can't. There's a lot of things it can't do at the end of that week. It can't repair itself like it would if you're getting that sleep, getting that rest, getting that right, the food and all the rest of it. So yeah, after that week, then I got rolled back for the shin splint thing, just because my feet couldn't do the on a swim, just couldn't swim like I was going, and then a boat pulled up next to me, they yanked me out of the water, threw me down, and said, "You're going to medical." And that's what you don't want to do in BUDS, go to medical, because you're worried that you're going to get, rolled back isn't that worse, but you're worried that it might be something more serious that might get you kicked out of the program.
Right.
So you avoid medical at all costs. At the time, now it's probably much better now, but at the time you avoided it like the plague. So they forced me to go. So I went in, they rolled me back one class, and it actually worked out very well for me. Just classed up with the next class, everything healed, and I should knock on wood, I never had that issue again. So then went through the rest with 213. So it ended up being the whole experience. I look back on it as probably the easiest thing I did in the SEAL teams, because you show up at the right place at the right time with the right gear, and you don't quit. Like those 4 things, that's all you need to do, and you make it through BUDS. So after that, then you actually have to start learning. You have to start proving yourself, have to start adapting to changing environments, establishing reputation through your character and through how you learn and apply those lessons in the field. So but it was a great 20 years, and it allowed me to make this transition to what I'm doing now.
A big question that people that I've told that I'm going to interview you, that actually the person that introduced me to you asked me, how fast was the transition from going 20 years from the military right into writing? Was it a quick transition? Was it a slow process? How did it go from, look, you're doing this every day, like you said, showing up where you need to be with your gear, going where you need to be, to it's all on you just to write and get this done?
Yeah, so I was lucky in that I knew what I wanted to do next. A lot of guys don't know what they want to do next, or they think they know, and then they make that transition and it's not what they thought. That happens quite a bit, or they're trying to recreate some of those feelings that they had in the SEAL teams on the outside in the private sector, or maybe they miss it, whatever it might be. But it was very clear to me that it was time to get out. So it wasn't a question of should I or shouldn't I? Okay, I did. Should I have done this? Now I'm on the outside, and I think I need to go back. So there was none of that. There was no second guessing. It was, hey, I got back from my last Iraq deployment. I was an 04, which is a major in the rest of the military. It's a lieutenant commander in the Navy. I'd been a task unit commander downrange, and that was the last time that I would ever tactically maneuver guys on the battlefield. After that, you can come back as a team commanding officer, but really as a team CO these days, you're more of a manager. You're in the tactical operations center, you're allocating assets, you're not out there with the guys making the calls on the ground, which is what I came in to do. So it was very clear to me after that deployment. I got back, I remember landed, headed home, and I was like, okay, time to move on. My family needs me. We have a special needs middle child who needs 24/7 full-time care for life. We have 2 other kids on either side of him, so it was time to move on and take care of my family. So I could take that breath. Went to a shore command at that point, went to BUDS as the operations officer, which is like, for those listening, it's like a COO of a company. You kind of manage day-to-day operations, but at BUDS, like, those instructors have it down. That first, second, third phase instructors, they're doing the job. So that was the first time I got to take a breath and make the decision, okay, going to get out here, have a couple more years left, give back as much as I can on the way out, but also figure out my next move. And what have I wanted to do my whole life other than this? it's write novels in this specific thriller genre, as political thrillers. So I think it was December of 2014, I want to say, and might be a little hazy, might be off by a bit, but around then is when I dropped my papers. And once you do that in the military, for those who have gotten out of this gigantic bureaucracy, you go in another pile. And all of a sudden, you're not on this track to continue on. You're on a track that gets out of the military, which means you got to go to medical, you need to go to dental, you need to get read out of secret programs, you need to turn in gear, and you need to make appointments for all these things. So point being, you have time. And that's when I started putting together that first book. So I knew exactly what I was going to do. I knew exactly where I was going. And for me, that made the transition not easy. I wouldn't say easy, but it wasn't unexpected. I knew where I was going, knew what I wanted to do, knew what I had to do to get there, and just devoted my bandwidth towards doing it. So, yep, it was. It wasn't like I was deployed one day and then home, and all of a sudden
right.
the next. There was this transition period there, which while I was still in the military, but getting out of the military, where I was also writing. So, just a few months after I got out, I submitted the manuscript to Simon & Schuster, and they ended up picking it up, and here we are today.
Man, I'm glad you did that. If you don't mind, can we talk about, I thought it was a very interesting story that I heard about you when you spoke about your special needs child, that Ross Perot did a lot. And I thought that was super interesting, that you'd been to all these doctors, you'd been to all these people that just kept kind of giving you the runaround. Ross Perot gets a hold of you and says, look, I'm going to bring in some people. How was that? 'Cause that's a super interesting story.
Yeah, that was crazy. So, my wife dealt with most all of this while I was deployed. So while I was getting ready to deploy or deploying, that was my job, being ready for war, being prepared for war, taking my guys to war. So so that's all my energy and effort was into being the best combat leader I could possibly be, which means my wife took care of everything else. And when I got back from that deployment, then I started, seeing what she had been dealing with. But we had no answers to what was going on. We had taken him to all the military medical facilities. We'd taken him up to Cedars-Sinai up in LA, up the road from San Diego there. Their specialists couldn't figure it out. We'd done some alternative type oxygen therapies and things like this to try to just, see if we could make some progress. But it wasn't until a friend of ours told one of Ross Perot's financial advisors about our story that everything changed. So I got a call out of the blue from Ross Perot in, I want to say, December, maybe right around the time I started writing the book, December 2014, maybe somewhere in there, maybe 13. But regardless, call from Ross Perot, who sounds exactly like Dana Carvey impersonating Ross Perot on Saturday Night Live. And he says, hey, we're going to fix your son. We're going to get him down here. I'm sending the jet tomorrow, and, get on there and come on down. And then he hangs up. And I was like, whoa, that was crazy. And about an hour later, his lead physician calls and says, hey, I know Mr. Perot just called. We're not going to send the jet tomorrow, but send us everything you have on your son. And we're going to put together a team of specialists here at Southwestern Medical Center outside of Dallas. And we'll fly you down and we'll see what we can do. So sure enough, they sent the G550 about a month later. And we got on that thing. They had a nurse on there for our son. And we flew out and did a week of testing there, and then they sent our blood all over the world. And they found a researcher in the Netherlands who had just discovered this specific genetic mutation, and our son was the 13th person in the world that they'd ever identified with. It didn't really change, didn't change outlook, prognosis, and with the 13th person in the world, there's not really much data about, what that long-term prognosis is. We just knew we'd have to take care of him forever. It didn't change that, but being able to put a name to it, that was really what that gift that Ross Perot gave us, being able to say, okay, it's a mutation of this certain gene that helps form the brain, and now we know what it is, we know what it was, nothing we can do, what could have done about it, and he's hopefully we have him because we are strong enough to give him. Help him reach his full potential, whatever that might be, while at the same time raising two kids on either side of him. So Ross Perot gave us that gift. And on my first book tour for the Terminal List, I went through Dallas and stopped by to see him again, and he still had our picture of our son on his desk.
Wow. That's got to give you a little bit of hope, though, just to put a name and a face to it. It's got to give you hope that you didn't have before because no one could give an answer.
Yeah, but it wasn't much hope. It was more like just being able to put a name to it, just I don't know how to really describe it, but just it helped so much. It was just took away one unknown and let us go, okay, reset. We know what it is. We know what to call it, and now here we go on the same path, but just from a more solid foundation. I guess that's a better way to put it. Just being able to put that name to it helped immeasurably. So yeah, I'll never be able to thank Ross Perot enough for that.
Yeah, I had heard that story and it was so amazing to me that you just got this call out of the blue and you have to hang up the phone going, all right, who's messing around? And I mean,
yeah, I did get a heads up that someone's going to be calling you, so I did get something like that.
Okay.
Like a special call is coming in. So I think I did get something like that, but it's still, yeah, Ross Perot calling, sounding like Dana Carvey, impersonating Ross Perot was pretty amazing. I'll never forget that.
That's an awesome story. So let's get into what we came here for. Let's get into these books.
All right,
man, let's start with, I'm just going to go through them. I think it's been enough time for 3 of them that we can talk a little bit about the details. We'll stay clear of details on the 4th one. We start with the terminal list. My first
people don't when I talk about First Blood or I talk about these different novels that influenced me over time. First Blood came out in 1972. That gave us the character Rambo, created by David Morrell. Amazing guy. We're friends now. He's an incredible person. But there's the ending of the book is different than the ending of the movie, and I won't say it, but I feel like if that book came out in 1972, that we should be able to talk about it. But so many people just know the movie that I usually refrain from giving away the end of the book because of that. But it's been a couple moons since 1972, so I feel like we should be able to talk about it.
And it's the best of the Rambo movies. So
good.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
So good. Just the cast.
And that's the difference between a book and a movie that are both fantastic, but both so different.
Yeah.
So going into this, when I talked to the producers on for the Terminal List series with Amazon, and I talked all about my background reading and wanting to do this my whole life, all the things we just talked about here, and I talked about that example of First Blood being different than the movie, but both being fantastic, and looking at all these different adaptations over time, books I'd read that had been adapted to film or to TV shows or whatever it might be. I think that helped put them at ease that I wasn't going to be this author attached to the programs just saying, you ruined my vision with every script I looked at. So I think that helped.
And there's quite a few of those out there. I mean, it's notorious in Hollywood for like Stephen King and stuff to tell him he hates the movie. There's quite a few authors. I point him out because he has so many of the movies that are out there. But the Terminal List, my first question right off the bat is, why so scorched earth right off the bat?
Yeah, so because I knew I had to come out with something very visceral, very primal, very hard-hitting, because it had to both get noticed by a New York publisher and it had to connect with an audience, with a readership. So I wrote about 6, 7, 8 different ideas down before I started, and it was very clear to me that I needed to start with the Terminal List. I really wanted to write book 3 first, Savage Son, but I knew that the characters weren't yet developed enough to explore the themes I explore in Savage Son. I had to start with the Terminal List. I had to have another book that was really a journey of redemption in True Believer, and then the audience, the readership would be ready for what happens in Savage Son. So it was very clear. It was not even a question which one to start with. And hence Scorched Earth Policy. So I remember growing up reading, and I love this theme of revenge. And I think there's just something that's so primal about it that we connect to. Just like we're drawn to fire. If there's a fire somewhere, you're drawn towards the campfire because it means life, it means food, it means sustenance, and there's just something primal about that. Even if we don't recognize it, something inside of us sure does. And for me, movies about revenge that had that theme, books about revenge that had that theme resonated, and so it was very clear that that's the one to start with. But I also remember in a lot of those voiceovers that were attached to movie trailers in the 80s, there was always this protagonist who had nothing left to lose. And I was always like, dang it, you know what? He's got something to lose. He could die. You'd go to jail forever. There's something to lose. So I needed to take that away from my protagonist. And I got, I guess we can talk it because there are more books out there. So it's not in the beginning when you just have one book, you don't know if there's going to be another.
Well, and I think you very much describe each book with the next book. Does that make any sense? Like you explain the terminal list quickly in True Believer, and then you explain True Believer and Savage Son quickly, and in Devil's Hand, I got to say, you explain the stories probably the most in depth of any of the 4 books. You really went into it by naming characters and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, and use that tool. We won't say what it is. Maybe you can find it on my website actually, because now there's the prologue, the preface, the prologue, the quotes that set the tone, then the first 2 chapters are up on the website for people. So if they're wondering what we're talking about with the introduction and kind of the recap of what happened, there's a specific scene and tool that I use to do that that I thought was kind of fun, because I've been on the receiving end of that before, and I got to I couldn't remember. It's been a few years, so it's been I did mine in 2006 or 7.
That's when I did mine, 2006.
A little bit. So I was thinking back a little bit, but at the same, I did my research, got online again, confirmed a few things, and then kind of wove it all together. And there's a lot of different techniques to these interviews that certain government agencies do to vet applicants. So I had to take a few of these different first-person accounts and kind of weave them into what my memory was of my experience, and then adapt it to the narrative as a way to explain how the character got to where he is today, if the people didn't read books 1, 2, and 3 ahead of time. But in that score search policy thing, I love that, but I didn't want to have that he's got nothing left to lose, but he really does. So I had to have him thinking that he's already dead. And I got that from reading books on samurai back in the day, and how they used to go into battle thinking they were already dead, because that made them more effective and efficient warriors. So I said, how would you do that to a modern warrior that's just back from Iraq and Afghanistan, that has to now become the terrorist, become the insurgent that he spent his whole life fighting, and bring the war home to people who have been sending young men and women to their death now for 20 years. At the time I wrote the book, 16 years. But I had to have him thinking he was already dead, so he would not have anything left to lose, and be able to compromise his principles essentially and become that terrorist that he'd been fighting, and start putting these people involved in this conspiracy into the ground. So that was fun. It was very therapeutic as well.
This, I'm going to tell you right up front, this is my favorite of the books.
This one is?
The terminal. Well, that one follows closely. But there was something about the terminal list that you just can't put it down. Like you see a total transformation of a person who in the beginning is very calculating and cold and doing the mission, to someone who just completely is still very much in control, but is out on a rope way out there by the end of the book.
Yeah, and he had to think that he was dying, and I got that really from the church hearings in the 70s, where Frank Church of Idaho held a series of hearings that explored and really brought to light a lot of abuses by different agencies of the federal government, and a lot of things changed after those hearings. There were a lot of different regulations and laws and safeguards put in place so that a lot of what was uncovered during those hearings didn't happen again. And I thought, hey, what if somebody didn't get that memo? What if enough time has passed since the mid-70s, where someone explores doing some of the things that were uncovered in those hearings again today in the modern era? So that kind of gave me a little bit of the background there from which to explore that conspiracy and have something happen where the protagonist would think that he's actually dying, and dying quickly.
Boy, was that a mistake for them to do that. So you go through the movie, you go through the book, and I like I said, I think it gets darker and darker and darker as the book goes on. And I think it now the ending is one of my absolute favorite endings of a book I've ever read. Just because I knew who was going to do the show, and I could actually see all of that playing out. I could hear the music that they would use, everything. But the most I guess you would say the most unexpected kill in the book was at the mosque.
Okay.
And that's where it puts it on a
I thought
whole.
you were going to say in the swamp. I thought you were going to say in Florida.
It was, but here's the thing. That was bad. But here's the thing. You kind of knew like that guy's going to get his. In the mosque, you set it up very smoothly to where it transitions on a dime. And
Nice.
it goes from this to that, and you're like, I gotta say it, you're like, holy shit, I can't believe he just did that.
Awesome. I love it.
So
That makes me happy.
I thought about the song. I don't know if you've ever heard Corn Coming Undone, but I could hear it playing in the background as he finishes off in slow motion walking away from the mosque.
It's been a long time since I've listened to music. I'm more of a podcast.
Right.
Now I came in, but I'm going to go back and listen to that now because as I wrote, I had different stanzas from When Man Comes Around from Johnny Cash.
Oh, great
I had
song.
that Terminal. So I had that in the, before the prologue. I had that before part 1, before part 2, before part 3, and before the epilogue. So I had these Johnny Cash stanzas in there from that song. But it turned out that as a brand new author, apparently you have to, go through the Johnny Cash estate to be able to use that sort of thing.
Right.
So I guess as a brand new author, that Simon & Schuster wasn't about to spend whatever you need to spend to use a song in a book on me, unproven author. But I did find out that that one line from that Johnny Cash got from somebody back in the 1800s, and no one knows who it was. And it's just kind of like a folk song type thing. It's not attached to a name or a label, of course, or anything like that. So there's a man going around taking names. And so that I was legally allowed to use that. And so that is the one quote that starts this first novel. But in my head, as I was writing, each one was that Johnny Cash song. So there is, I don't know if I have to look at the galley copy to see if it made it into the galley. I don't think so. But in the initial printouts of the book, where it's just bound, with like a ring type liner, like you can do at Staples, it's all those stanzas are in there.
Oh, wow.
Got after it.
Yeah. I even thought of an end theme song was Five Finger Death Punch, Wrong Side of Heaven, the Righteous Side of Hell.
Ooh, I'm going to write this down because, let's see. I'm going to write that down. So Corn is the first one. Which song is it again?
Coming Undone. And
I know that one, but-
Jack, I truly saw him walking away in slow motion with it going on, with it at a very specific part of the song. And I was like, yes. And that's why it's my favorite part. And then the other one for his kind of overall theme is it's called The Wrong Side of Heaven, the Righteous Side of Hell. And it is actually about soldiers saying that they're on the wrong side of heaven, but they're definitely on the righteous side of hell of what they did.
Nice. I like it. Awesome. And who sings that one?
That's Five Finger Death Punch.
Awesome. I got it. Sorry to the listeners. I'm taking notes.
So
I was talking to someone today, and they had two things like this. And I was like, oh, I'm going to take those. Those are fantastic. And we got off the podcast, got off the interview, and I wrote one down, and I'm like, what was the other one? And I still can't right now remember what it was. I remember one of the two words, but I can't remember the other. So, yeah, that's how it goes.
a lot of people compare you and ask you, I've heard, they say you are James Reese. I disagree. Not because, I disagree. I don't disagree for the reason you say. You say, well, he's a lot smarter. He's more cunning. He's this and that. I think you're Freddy.
Well, if I'm going to read book 2, I hope I'm not. But
well, yeah,
I don't know as much about weapons as Freddy. He's like the gun nerd guy. But
there were so many things that stuck out about Freddy, comparing them to you.
Actually, well, there's some family stuff in there that I wove in to develop that character that I obviously incorporated from my own experience. So that's in there as well. But But I don't want to give no spoiler alerts. But he makes it through most of the book. I guess that's a good way to put it.
Majority. And technically, he makes it through the majority of 2 books. So.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
So I got to ask about your villains. when you do a villain, you do almost like a super villain. And I wonder about that your villains, they're not just bad guys, they're bad guys. There's nothing redeemable about any of your bad guys.
Well, there might be a couple in there. The guy that has the family that in the first book that has to, well, I don't want to give too much away, but has to blow himself up. But I like writing the villains. I like writing antagonists, but I also have to write them in a way that when you just make them human enough, but by the time they get what's coming, that the reader isn't like, oh, that was really mean. Why did he have to, make that guy walk around the tree and get eaten alive by the swamp with his. So you have to make them, bad enough where the reader, you're not going to lose the reader because of what happens to them. So I do really like writing them, especially these last ones. This last one in the Devil's Hand, because for James Reese, I can go back to my own experience. I can think about what it was like to be a sniper in Ramadi at the height of the war. I can think what would I do here or there if I was better at these things, that sort of thing. But for the antagonists, I really don't know what it's like to be a politician or to want to be a politician or to want to grab that power or be a private sector financier type guy, whatever. I don't know what it's like to want to do those things. So I get to explore what it's like through the eyes of my antagonists, and I really enjoy writing those characters because of that. And it's super fun for me, and then it's fun for me to figure out how they're gonna get it.
Yeah, well, definitely that government official that you're talking about. He likes to talk a lot.
In Devil's Hand?
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially when he meets Mr. Reese. I was like, Jiminy Christmas, if I was Reese, I'd tell this guy, can we get on with this?
So I find that I get to know my characters a lot through dialogue. There's certain things you can do with descriptions and all the rest of it. But when you have a conversation or you're writing a conversation, I don't necessarily know going in all their traits. I just know, hey, I need, this guy to do this guy to do that in the outline. These are pretty much my characters. Others pop up along the way as necessary, or it just becomes natural to incorporate a new character here or there in the book. But they don't really have their own personalities yet. They're just a name and a position, essentially. But when I have them in conversation with other characters, that's where I really get to know them as an author. That's where they develop these idiosyncrasies that differentiate them from other characters in the book. So it's really through that dialogue that I do that I get to know them and that the reader gets to know them as well. So I find that that's some of the parts I really enjoy.
In speaking about that, then I want to talk about that a little bit without giving away too much, but was there kind of a point and I think you know what I'm talking about, in their first meeting, was there a point in telling all of those, I guess you would say, facts from him to Reese?
So in which
in the Devil's Hand.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember which one you're talking about.
So when they meet at Camp David.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so I left that character to be, in my mind, he's not an antagonist. He is a good guy character. But I wanted it to be, I wanted people to think about it. And because I've heard from different people now that the galley copy's out there, that it kind of goes both ways. Some people think he's a good guy. Some people think he's a bad guy. And I love that because that's kind of how I wrote it. But for me, he was a good guy. But not for everybody. And that was intentional as I wrote it. And I knew that different people with different life experiences would have a different take on that character.
Yeah, I think he definitely has skeptical motivations.
Oh yeah. No, that's for sure. Definitely motivations that aren't pure to most. Well, other than him, and then what he shares with Reese. So yeah, I love developing those characters like that through conversation, just like you kind of would in real life, is feel somebody out a little bit. Instead of just getting right to it to move the story along, I like to move that story and develop the characters through that dialogue and through that experience. So yeah, I love every part of writing these things.
Yeah, well, I'm telling you. Let's roll back real quick to True Believer. Talk about it. I don't want to give too too much away on Terminalist, I want you to know though that is my absolute favorite. The ending, I could picture it. I'm telling you, it was even with the plane and what happens at it was amazing.
Awesome. Well, I was there. I walked that same path that he walks, and I was looking at the trees and the grass and the homes and all the rest of it. So I try to put boots on the ground wherever I can, just like I did. I went to Mozambique for the second book, went to South Africa, went to Kamchatka Peninsula, Russia, just south of Siberia for the third. So I like to go to these places and put boots on the ground to weave this different local flavor in. So I was at that exact airfield that I described, looking at that and looking at the beach and the rocks and where he'd come over the beach and all that sort of thing. So I find that to be that's fun for me to do as well.
In talking about that, that was probably my favorite part of True Believer was in Mozambique. I really enjoyed that part of it. I think that really gave a different side, and it started that redemption path that you talked about was right there. Same kind of things that he'd done before, but he was putting it towards good, very much down that redemption path. And I love the characters that you brought out there that run the ranch and all that kind of stuff. And I hate to sound like a fanboy and keep saying these things, but there was so much that stuck out in these books to me that I really cared about. You made it a point to talk about, when Reese had trouble with how they treated the help. And so he made sure that it was a team of his instead of people working for him. And you really get to see those characters really, really start to build up. In saying all of that, what was your favorite part of that book?
Ooh, favorite part of True Believer? Well, I did go to Africa and Mozambique to do that research before I'd even submitted the first novel to Simon & Schuster. And that's because I'm familiar with John Grisham's story of writing A Time to Kill first, and he couldn't give that book away. Then he writes The Firm. That one takes off. It's the movie with Tom Cruise. Then they go back. They make the movie with Matthew McConaughey for A Time to Kill. And I haven't read some of his later ones, but I read most of those earlier ones, the first 10 or so, let's say. But I think A Time to Kill is, for me anyway, is probably his best work for me. He's done amazing things, of course, but that was the one that didn't work at first. And had he stopped and gotten discouraged, he wouldn't have written The Firm, which means he'd still be sitting in a law office somewhere doing something he doesn't enjoy. He wanted to write. He wanted to be an author. So he kept going, and he wrote that second novel, even knowing that first one wasn't selling and didn't really work out. And then off it goes. So I was always going to write a second one. Now, if the second one didn't work, I was then going to reevaluate my life choices and maybe have to use some of these contingency plans. But I was always going to do two. So first one, almost done by the time I get out of the military, doing my edits, going back through it over and over, trying to get it as good as I can possibly get it before I submit. But before I do, I take off to Mozambique to write True Believer. So I needed to put boots on the ground. I hadn't been there. I'd been to some of the other places in the novel. I've been to Morocco. I've been to Odessa. I've been to some of these other areas, but I had not been to Mozambique. And I needed to go to a place where James Reese could learn to live again and could take those skills and turn them into something, apply them to something positive and productive. So I went there, put boots on the ground, and that camp that I describe in the novel is the one that I was at in Mozambique. Those professional hunters, they're the ones that were there with me. The tracker, that was the one that was there with me, or multiple trackers. So so I got to weave all that local flavor into the story, which I wouldn't really have been able to do by just doing a Google search and just imagining what it's like over there. So I like to go there, even if I don't know exactly. And when I went there, I had pages of questions I wanted to ask. But I found that once I got over there, I answered those. But I got a ton more that I didn't even know I needed to ask. So if I was just researching those questions online, that's all I would have done. And then I would have written. But having gone there, then I get to figure out all this other stuff that I wasn't even in my head that I needed to even ask had I not put those boots on the ground. So my favorite part of that one, well, I got to go to do that research. So it was amazing going there and spending time in Mozambique. But, I gotta say I like the end because I know where it's going and I'm excited to write the next one. So I kind of like the resolution pieces because I want to make after someone has trusted me with their time, whether they're listening to it or they're reading it. Same thing with social media or a blog post. So people have trusted me with their most valuable asset. I want to be a good arbiter of that trust, and I want to be able to be a good return on investment for someone. So I want them to get to the end of this novel and have enough resolution where they're like, awesome, where they feel good and they got to this place, but that also once they want to go on to that next novel, they also have like one lingering thing they need solved, they want to figure out. So it leads them into that next book. Same thing you want to do at the end of a chapter. You want to get to that end of a chapter for me, and I want people to turn to the next one. I want to keep them up all night. So when I get to the end of that chapter, I want to leave just that little bit of, what's next? What's next? And same thing at the end of the novel, but with a lot more resolution than you get at the end of a single chapter.
In saying that, then let me ask you a question, because there was something more that I wanted. Why did you make rekindling a certain relationship between Reese and someone else here and here and here, and it just kind of goes, I'm like, man, come on, let's get this going.
A true believer?
Yes.
Yeah, because it's kind of like the third date rule, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, something like that's kind of how I thought of it. And I also thought that, hey, James Reese's family in the first, and it's not a spoiler really because I think it's on the book jacket and it's in the first few chapters. It was brutally murdered, a family that he loves. So he can't just immediately jump into this other, relationship the next day. He needs to work a few things out first. So I couldn't really in the second novel, even I was never in that second novel going to have anything happen there either. But by the time we get to the third, there's enough resolution there from the first two that it's time for him to make some decisions and figure out what he's going to do going forward and who he's going to spend that time with, which path he's going to take. So by the third, it was time to explore that relationship.
So, and I guess not even a relationship necessarily that I'm talking about, but with them where just him trying to reconnect, just to say, hey, I'm here. I'm not dead yet. And I was like, oh, it's going to happen. Nope. Oh, it's going to happen. Nope.
Yeah.
I really thought on the ship, something's going to happen. I thought it was going to go through on the ship.
No. I mean, you've made those sat phone calls. They're awkward anyway with someone that's expecting the call at a certain time of day, and you sound like an alien from outer space on some of those satcom uplinks and downlinks from during that time frame anyway. Now you can probably just get on any cell phone in those areas of the world, but back in the day you had to call from a sat phone,
right?
And times it was hard to understand the person on the other end, so I had to weave all that in there.
Favorite character from True Believer?
Favorite character from True Believer? Well, I always have an affinity, of course, for the protagonist, because that's why I've chosen to write these stories around and through the eyes of. But probably the same as a lot of the readers out there that like that Hastings family. They want to know more about the Hastings family. Yep. They want to know about Rich Hastings. So I get those questions all the time, and I might explore some of that further because it is a fascinating family, and actually it's based on, well, some of those characters are based on people I met in Mozambique, but the actual Hastings last name comes from a family in Montana. And I know the wife, and she came from what was then Rhodesia. So she lent me a bunch of books that I used for research, and she's fantastic, amazing. So I based Caroline Hastings on her for book 3. You don't meet her until book 3, but the Hastings clan is definitely fascinating. And the question I get most about the series of the Terminal List is, who's going to play Rafe Hastings? That's the question
I've been thinking about it.
And I don't know yet.
I know who could play his dad.
Rafe Hastings, Rafe's dad?
Yes.
Even though that comes in Savage Son, but
I think Mel Gibson could pull it off.
Yeah, Mel Gibson could pull that out for sure.
Especially, having, I think him. I'm not sure. I'm having trouble getting a couple of them in my head of who they're going to be. I'm trying to figure out Gray. I really can't.
There's a few people that could work on him. That's a good point. There's a few people that could be Gray. I don't even have one in my head. author that could do that. I'm sure there's a few that would be able to really pull that off, though.
And by the way, when you said the guy that gets blown up, that he's redeemable, he's not redeemable.
In the first book.
Yes. Yeah.
He has misgivings. He has second.
I think he's kind of an asshole, Jack.
Yeah, well, they're all gonna. That's why they all get it.
So let's move on to Savage Son. This one has a lot of meaning with you. You have said in the past, this was from your childhood, something that you had always wanted to do. And you had read a short story and you had always wanted to recreate that short story. Now, that short story has been recreated a couple of times. There was an Ice-T movie. There was a couple different things that have
Surviving the game.
Yeah. Great movie. So there's been a couple of things where that happened, where it got recreated, but I think you really got to the heart of it. And in this one, in this book, this is where the story really kind of, it takes a really dark turn in this one.
In Savage Son?
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's dark turns in all of them, I guess. That's why I have to keep asking which one.
Yeah, well, I think this one, just because, I mean, just the hunts alone, without anything else.
Yeah. So, I read Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell. It's a 1923 short story back in 6th grade. And even back then, I knew the path I was on, military, and then into being an author. But I always wanted to pay tribute to that short story through a longer form novel. And growing up, I always imagined them making that a movie of it. And there was a movie, an actual movie called Most Dangerous Game back in the day. I think it was made in like 38 or something like that.
I think it was even sooner than that.
It probably could have been,
Yeah,
right. Because it's like 20 something.
Yeah, I think it's 28.
Yeah, I think that might be it. But I wanted to do a modern take on it, and so this was my opportunity to do that. And I knew that I couldn't be the first one, couldn't be the second book, but by the third one, that's when readers were ready for me to explore the dark side of man through the dynamic of hunter and hunted, and that's really what Savage Son is all about. So yeah, it may take a couple dark turns in there.
Yeah, I could say that. What gave you the idea, other than you know the short story that you talked about, but what gave you the idea of like Medney and all that kind of stuff? Of course, all that stuff exists, but what gave you that idea to actually place it there?
Yep. So Most Dangerous Game that takes place on an island. So I needed an island. So to draw that parallel. But the other books that are most closely associated with that one that I'm also paying tribute to, I mean, most of it is Most Dangerous Game. That's the base. But Rogue Male by Jeffrey Household was another novel that moved the genre forward, written in 1939. First Blood by David Morrell, 1972. And then Last of the Breed by Louis L'Amour, which I think is 1986, I want to say. So all of those were so influential on me that really this was the book to incorporate a lot of that influence and pay tribute to those other authors that inspired me to go down this path at a very early age. So I got to weave all of that in there. So I think I might go back. I don't want to give away too much here, but I'm planning on going back and exploring something I don't gloss over in, but I make more, there's a certain time period that I don't explore fully near the end of Savage Son to move the story along in Siberia. So I might go back and explore that at some point. So I think that'd be pretty fun.
Are you possibly talking about the ghost?
I am.
Oh,
so,
that will be great.
Yeah, it's on my list. It's in there.
Maybe a short story.
It's possible. So we shall see. But yeah. So I really, with that one, I'm paying tribute to all those authors. And there's a lot of all those influences growing up in all of my novels. And in particular, Joseph Campbell, who wrote Hero with 1,000 Faces. I was introduced to him in 1988 through a series of interviews he did with Bill Moyers called The Power of Myth. My mom and I watched that together on PBS, and I found out about, look at this guy. His work influenced George Lucas in Star Wars. So I was enthralled immediately, and then found out that what he's exploring here is all these different cultures that had similar mythologies, even though they never met each other. There's this similar hero's journey, whether you are in Northern Europe or Africa or China, wherever it was, there is this similar mythology passed down, first orally and then written down, where a reluctant hero goes on a journey, goes on a quest. He meets a mentor along the way who gives him either a tool or a bit of knowledge to help him on that journey. Typically goes into a cave at some point, comes out a little bit different, and is tested in some sort of a crucible, and then comes back from where he came to pass on those lessons to that next generation. So what that's really doing is passing on tactical lessons to those that are going to defend the family, defend the tribe, and pass on lessons from the hunt. So things that are going to keep your bloodline, your tribe, your community alive. And so those things resonate with us still today. They're still in there. So all of the books are influenced heavily by Joseph Campbell and by all those other authors that I read growing up, and by the academic study of warfare that I did growing up, all that studying of terrorism and insurgencies and counterinsurgencies, and then of course the practical experience on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan.
In saying all that about the common myths and things like that, you do have a reluctant hero in this, and that comes a lot from that, is reluctant heroes. But another thing that sticks out from what you're saying is that you were talking about people that are going to protect the family, protect the clan, and everything like that. What's interesting about Savage Son is I think you almost take an opposite look at that. Is that am I following it correctly, or am I reading it wrong?
No, I think you can interpret it any way you want to as the reader.
Right.
But really, he's protecting that family. They came for him once in Montana. He almost lost his new love, these new relationships, the people that protected him.
Right.
And so now it's about making sure that does not ever happen again.
I guess I should have been more clear on that. Not that one. I agree with that on that. I'm talking about the Russians.
The one near the end.
Yes, very much opposite.
There's still some revenge. There's revenge in there that runs through. There's revenge theme, not just in the first book. I mean, the first book is essentially solely about that revenge without constraint. But there are themes of revenge that continue through all the novels, to include The Devil's Hand, and to include the fifth one that I'm writing now, and the sixth one that I already have in my head, because I find it helpful to know where I'm going and where the story's headed, so I'm not wasting any bandwidth worried about, how am I going to end this to lead into the next one? Like, I've already got that down, so all my bandwidth is on the story. It's not worried about a title. I like having a title soon, even if it's a working title and it can change, that's fine. But as long as I have that there, I'm not worried about it anymore. I know where I'm going, okay, and I know when the next one's starting. I know how the next one's ending. Okay, I'm not worried about that at all, and all my time, energy, and effort is devoted solely to making it the best story I possibly can.
So let's talk about your new one. April 13th of this year, it comes out.
April 13th, yeah.
It's gonna be awesome. Let's talk about it. This one to me, I had told you this before. This one to me seems more ripped from the headlines, more of everything. I mean, you even point out specific people in the recent past. You don't say names or anything like that, but you definitely point out specific things. Why that for this one? Because it's not really a topic in the other books.
So in this one, I wanted to explore something that I thought about a lot in uniform, what I continue to think about today as an author, which is, what has the enemy learned by watching us on the field of battle for this last 20 years at war? Essentially, we've been playing poker, and our enemy has been able to see our cards and watch us on the field. What have they learned by doing that? What have they learned from 1979 up to 2001 from that time period? So that's what really I'm exploring. What has the enemy learned, and what are they incorporating into future battle plans? So as I'm doing this, well, I started in 2019. I write the outline, and I write it on the way to Russia, because I leave my computer at home. I leave my phone at home, because who knows what people have sent me over the years with my background. I just didn't want to walk through any security in Russia and have them download all these different things and connect all these different dots. So I brought a sat phone to call home on, and that's it. So I wrote the outline on the way to Russia, and I start doing this research when I get home into infectious diseases, into the weaponization of infectious diseases, into what the Japanese did in World War II, who they used bioweapons on, where did that data go at the end of the war, what the Germans did in World War II, where did that data go at the end of the war, how did we start our bioweapons program, how did the Soviet Union start their bioweapons program, what happened in the 70s when we signed bioweapon conventions, did we adhere to them, did the Soviets adhere to them, if we're making bioweapon defense type vaccines or blockers or things like that, well, you have to create then the actual bioweapon that you're creating the defense against as well. So I started researching all these things, and then January, February hits last year, and that's COVID. So I'm thinking in terms of the enemy. I'm thinking in terms of Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, super empowered individuals, terrorist organizations, what they have learned. And now, what are they learning? Watching our response to COVID. And then I'm writing. And then we get to end of May. And then we have the civil unrest in our cities. And what is the enemy learning for that? So I'm writing. I know the enemy's learning something. So because this book is about that, I incorporate that. Then we get into this very contentious political season and election cycle. And the enemy's not just watching that and then going about their day. They are making notes. They are applying those notes and those lessons to future battle plans. So it's very timely in that respect. And the theme of the book, the topic that I explore, lends itself to continual learning, continual adaptation, just like the enemy is doing to us. So I think that's why it seems ripped from the headlines. But initially, back when I started doing this research in 2019, it was really just going to be about 2001 up to today, and 1979 to 2001. So those two time periods essentially kind of morphed together, and what the enemy has learned from those two different paradigms as far as our response to terrorism, our conduct on the battlefield, that sort of thing. So I expected that to continue, but then when COVID hit, when the civil unrest hit, when the election cycle hit, those are all things that the enemy is looking at. And so I couldn't ignore them. So they ended up being woven into the novel.
Another question that I have about it is you, while you were a SEAL, did a lot of operations in Iranian-influenced Iraq. That came through in this book.
I think I've mentioned it in every book. I think there's at least one sentence in each book where I throw something in there about IEDs or EFPs and how they got into Iraq. I think I at least insinuate it in each of the novels. But here I really go into it because it's an important part of the storyline and the background of some of those bad guys, some of those antagonists. They're actually involved in on the other side of those programs that got IEDs, EFPs into Iraq to really wear down public support for what we were doing there at the time, to give Iran that influence over Iraq. So something they couldn't do during the 8 years of war that they had from 80 to 88. So it's all that weaves in this novel. And this one, I got very fortunate in that I'd been to most of the places that I talk about in this novel. I didn't need to go put boots on the ground because I couldn't. But that was just lucky. That was just lucky in this one. And this was a lot of academic research, a lot of interviews, and a lot of history woven in to this one to form the foundation of this novel.
Can we talk about the Batcave for a minute?
I'm going to see how much I can talk about the Batcave.
Yeah, I that's why I said, can we talk about it a little bit?
Maybe a little bit.
How did you do your, I guess the question is, how did you do your research for that?
Yep. So there's a lot when you dig deep online. There's a lot out there. And then when you talk to people who are involved in these different things, they all leave a lot out. But you talk to another person, what they leave out might be what the other person put in. So just like a journalist would go around and talk to multiple sources to put a story together, in a very similar respect, you just talk to multiple people, you do your research, you dig, you verify, you question, and then you connect dots. So I think that's what a journalist would do in researching a story anyway. And that's what I did for this. I just had a question. I kind of knew what I knew was really what I knew from Hollywood movies, what I knew from other books in the genre, and most of those books were very similar to what is portrayed in Hollywood films. What I found out is that the real life isn't really like a Hollywood film as far as these things go. So I didn't know that going in. I went completely, I was new. So I didn't have any preconceived notions other than what I'd seen in Hollywood. And I knew that, hey, that might not be quite right. It looks good. Let's see what it's really like. And so it's just my best stab at it. You know, I don't, but I do think it's fairly accurate.
I'll agree with you. How many more books you got in you?
Well, I have at least 2 because the next contract is for 2 and I'm writing 5 and I know where 6 is going. So at least that many, and then we'll see. I think I don't think I'm going to ever be at a loss for topics or themes to explore or storylines. There's just so much to explore out there, and I love doing this. It's definitely not laborious. I love every aspect. I mean, it's laborious, and then you have to put in the work. You got to put in the mat time. You got to put in the ring time. It doesn't just happen. But I love every part of it. I love solving problems on the written page, the same way I used to do downrange. Although now here, if I'm solving problems aggressively on the page of a novel and I mess it up, that's okay. I can come back the next day and fix it. I can sleep on it. Whereas if the bullets are flying and you're maneuvering forces and you're looking for gaps and looking for things to exploit, you can mess that up pretty bad. Even if you do the quote unquote right thing, you can still mess it up downrange just because the enemy gets a vote and there's so many different dynamics in a gunfight. But with this, I get to think things through. I get to sleep on them. If I can't figure something out, that's okay. I can go for a run. I can have dinner. I can come back to it the next day. I can do a podcast and come and make it as good as it can be over a year-long period. So I enjoy every aspect of it, and I don't think I'm running out of ideas anytime soon.
Let's quickly go over the other stuff that you have going right now. You have officialjackcarr.com. They can find out everything they want to know about you. It's got a newsletter. It's got everything. You sell products on there. You got some pretty great bottle openers and things like that on there. Anything that you want to talk about on the website? Because I think it's a very in-depth website. I think it covers everything, the books and beyond, pretty much. And it seems like you want to do with the next thing we talk about, you kind of want to cover everything and beyond.
Exactly. So I get asked questions all the time. Hey, do you have any books? Can you recommend any books? Or, hey, what do you about this topic or that topic or something similar? Or, hey, what influenced you? So I have those reading lists up there where I pick 6 books a month and I talk about where I was when I read those, how they influenced me either as a combat leader or as an author. So I pick 6 books from my list every month and I talk about those, and those go up on the website, on the blog, and people can sign up for the newsletter so they know when those are coming up. So that's in there. I get a lot of questions about different guns and gear, weapons and blades, that sort of thing. So there's some blog articles on that, so people can just deep dive in if they want to know a little bit more about some of the gear in the books or about some of the vehicles in the books or those sorts of things. There's probably something that I've written on the blog about it. So updates on the terminal list, like those will be in there. Those will be in the newsletter. I'll get some, I think they're supposed to send me some behind the scenes pictures that I can kind of leak out at some point. So that'll be kind of fun. Those will go in there. So yeah, that's on the website, and same thing on Instagram is where I'm most active on the social channels. So I try to be thoughtful in what I'm putting up there, because once again, people have trusted me with their time. So I want to add value to that person's day rather than just posting something that's a funny meme or whatever, which are fine. I like memes too, but I want to put something out there that's thoughtful. So I put time, energy, and effort into all of these things.
Blades, books, and bullets. I love watching these. They're great. So these aren't the written out. This is actually you showing each book, you showing each weapon, you showing each piece of equipment. And I really love these videos. And you're very steadfast in them. You put them out every month. Have you ever gotten any? Because one of my favorite things is how you start them is your bad reviews.
Yeah. So I like to pick a couple every month and read those, and it's they're kind of fun, and you turn a negative into a positive.
You had read one where you had a negative review where they said, I don't know if they said you were necessarily racist, but your Mexican character was.
Yeah.
And I thought, he's one of the biggest heroes of the book. Like, he makes so much stuff happen. How could you possibly get that from reading this book? Which makes me think they didn't read the book.
Right. Yeah. That's the thing about there being no barriers today. There's a lot of great things, about that, is that we can connect and do this. I can connect with readers. But at the same time, back in, let's say 1985, if you were going to comment on someone's book that's a subjective work, you would have to write a letter. You'd have to mail it. You'd have to figure out where to mail it, and which newspaper, which magazine. Then it would get there. Maybe someone would open it. Maybe it would make it to an editor's desk. Maybe they would read it. And then if it was crazy, they'd toss it in the trash. But today, all that crazy's out there. So there's no block. There's no filter. It is all out there unfiltered. There's some good about it and there's some bad about it. But so for some of those, where you get the 1-star review where it's obvious that someone didn't, they just don't like maybe what they think your politics are, or they don't like, that stuff, and they're just trying to hurt you. Well, yeah, you can spend your time doing that, I guess. I can think of a lot better things to do with the finite time that I have on this earth, and we never know how long that is going to be. So you get to decide. That's what's fascinating to me, the psychology of not just the bad reviews, but when you see on Twitter or something, and it's not even on my stuff, just in general, how negative people can be and how much time they can spend trying to, hurt somebody else, or just be mean to someone else, or completely unnecessary, when they could have taken that time and allocated it in a productive direction, either to, improve themselves, their situation in life, or help someone else, maybe. Like, you could take that time and leave a good review for a book you like on Amazon, but you chose to write a paragraph, 2 paragraphs, and be mean and nasty about something, and that's time you're never getting back. So the psychology of that is fascinating, and I get to weave that into my stories, and then I get to share it on these videos with people and turn that negative into a positive.
Yeah, definitely keyboard warriors out there. 3 other things real quick. Danger Close Podcast. Let's talk about it. It just launched. You already have like 47 million subscribers to it. It blew up. Like, the second it launched, it blew up.
That was crazy. I thought, hey, this is just going to be another way to connect with readers that you couldn't have done back in 85 or 95. So why not do it and be able to explore some of those things that we just talked about, some of that negativity from that's inherent in social media platforms, being able to just reply to something with 1 sentence. Nuance is lost. A lot of sarcasm is lost. A lot of understanding is lost. Body language is lost, of course, because you're not talking to an actual person. Facial expressions are lost. The digital courage is what someone told me today. Like liquid courage. Now there's a digital courage, like you just said, keyboard warriors. So that's into the mix right there. So that if I want to, people ask me questions all the time where maybe the answer might be a little more nuanced than I want to get into with 1 sentence as I'm going through at 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, thanking people for taking a risk on me as an author, which I try to get back to everybody, but I know it's probably not happening now, but I'm trying to go through at the end of the day at least and give that little heart or say thank you, because I sincerely appreciate everybody's support. So I try to do that. But sometimes someone will ask a question that will require a little more time, a little more thought, a little more nuance, that maybe a 1 sentence response won't be productive, because either the receiver or someone else who sees it might interpret that 1 sentence based on a host of factors where they don't have that nuance. They don't have that tone. They don't have any of those things that we have here as we're talking like this. So I saw the podcast as a way to explore some of those topics, and then also share some more behind the scenes, click closer to the books, what inspired them, who inspired different parts of them, what I learned about different weapons, training, whatever it might be, and then talk about some of these more I guess sensitive and divisive is a term for it, but more issues that are better discussed like this than with a one sentence answer and then going on to the next and then coming back and then getting mad because someone misinterpreted what you said and then write another thing and then someone else comes in and just tries to do the trolling thing and spark, so it's just. So I don't really get into that on those social channels just because I don't think it's a proper venue for it or a very productive venue for moving any sort of conversations forward in a productive way. So the podcast will be the mechanism for doing that.
Yeah, and I think anything that you would say on there, that person is there to do that. It's not going to change nothing you say is going to change their mind.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I want to talk about the show real quick and then we'll wrap this up. Amazon Prime, The Terminal List. You did it. You made it. You're there.
Well, I don't really look at it in those terms. And, people asked me when the news hit that they were starting to film about 2 weeks ago. They're like, hey, how do you feel? You must feel amazing that they started. And I was like, yes. And I do. And then I'm like, on to the next thing. Because there's so much going on that I haven't really taken a time yet to breathe, to take a breath, look around. People keep saying, hey, you need to enjoy it. I'm like, I am enjoying it. I'm just busy. So at some point I need to maybe get a little less busy, but now's not the time for that. Now's the time to build, to capitalize on momentum, to continue building this readership, because that allows me to write. That allows me to continue to develop these stories and publish them. So yeah, it's once again, I feel very fortunate on a host of levels.
And I think it's more than just a book. I think you're building a brand. I think there is a Jack Carr brand out there. And people know what they're going to get from that brand because it's consistent on everything that comes out. There's nothing that's subpar. Everything is on point. Pratt has already started putting out stuff. He took a video the other day in his trailer of being in Reese's uniform and stuff like that. So getting excited. Now, I know people have asked before, but I got to ask just to make sure. When's it coming out?
Classified.
Okay. All right. I figured you would say that.
And probably also it can change, I would guess. So I doubt it is in stone yet anyway. So they're very hesitant to put that out there yet before it gets closer, I think, anyway. I don't ask too many questions just because I don't want to be annoying. I'm just so happy to be here. So that's kind of the stage I'm in.
Okay. All right, guys. I think that's going to be it. Jack, I can't tell you how much I thank you for coming on and talking. I have been looking forward to this so much, and they got a hold of me and said that something popped up on you and we had to reschedule. I'm like, look, let's just get in here and get it done. So, anything else that you want to mention before we get out of here?
Thank you so much for having me on, and looking forward to seeing how you transition out of what you're doing and build what you're building, because you were exceptionally good at it. And keep crushing, and we'll do this again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. So guys, that's going to be it for tonight. Make sure you check out this book series, The Terminal List, True Believer, Savage Son, and in April, The Devil's Hand is coming out, and it's I think it's going to blow your mind, just like all these other books have. The Amazon Prime show from The Terminal List is coming up. You can go to officialjackcarr.com. You're pretty much everywhere. The Danger Close podcast, anywhere they're looking for you, they can find you. Whether they want to read you, watch you, or listen to you, they can find Jack Carr. If you want more of me, you can go to the Facebook group at the DTD Podcast. You can go to YouTube to DTD Podcast to see these videos of the interviews, or you can catch me on Twitter at DoubleSpeakDJ. Jack, thank you so much for coming on. That's going to be it, guys. Make sure you check this out, officialjackcarr.com. That's Jack. I'm DJ. This has been the show. We'll catch you on the next one. Thanks, guys.